Hello, everyone, and good morning and good night. This is our first episode of the podcast between myself, Chobra, and my good friend Matt Demers, where we'll be covering a diverse array of topics, mostly focused on gaming and esports, but also relating to pretty much the world we live in and the generation we've been through and also that we're living through together. Of course, my name is Chobra, also known as Will Cho. I guess that's kind of backwards, actually, now that I've thought about it. But my co-host, Matt Demers, is here with me. How are you, Matt?
Hey, man. How's it going? I actually was thinking in my head myself about like what the intro would sound like just out of like curiosity. And I'm like, yep, that pretty much covers it. It's I had to explain like a couple times to friends like what the naming, like why the name is the name, and they were like, "Oh, it makes more sense once you've like actually explained it."
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh yeah, because
no one ever says those two.
No, exactly.
So.
That's one of those things that I think about podcasts that I've listened to, and that's like a question that happens like a bunch down the line. They're like, "Oh, how'd you come up with the name of the show?" And I'm like, "Oh, I should just get out of the way now." But I was like thinking about how we like what we wanted to talk about, and like when I kind of just sent you a Discord message or a Twitter DM or something that was just like, "Hey, you want to record a podcast?" And I didn't know how to like have it be esports but not esports, because obviously like both of us have an established career in esports, but like I didn't want to like pigeonhole us. And I just thought, I'm like, okay, let's just come up with an idea for a title that people like esports industry workers could like look at and be like, oh, I know what they're talking about, kind of thing, just from like the get-go. And I kind of thought, oh, the esports sleep schedule, because that's the thing that, you know, regardless of what you're doing in this industry, you've probably had to pull an all-nighter at some point. And that was like too wordy and awkward to say, and I was like, oh wait, it's going to be like a morning when I'm recording, because it's like when we're recording right now, it's like 9:30 in the morning for me, and because you're in Seoul,
right?
It's evening for you, so you're time traveling. You're still March 9th. I'm March 10th. So yeah, good morning, good night. That's the story behind the title of the podcast. But yeah, we didn't really want to make this into something that was too pigeonholed into esports stuff, because obviously like we didn't really want to limit it to just like a trade show podcast, if that might make sense. But I don't know, we just kind of like came up with some topics. We're gonna kind of cover those. I guess, do you want to go kind of into like the intro?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's one of those things where I think both of us have obviously thought about to maybe different extents, but you know, what kind of content we could do within this realm, right? Not necessarily specifically the podcast format, but you know, something that isn't maybe, you know, something that we're investing everything into, but also where you can express yourselves. And for me, obviously, I've started a couple of different projects on my end along those lines as well. And you know, as much as there's different strengths and weaknesses to, you know, whether it's doing solo projects, duo projects, or obviously larger projects that maybe eventually grow into a whole team effort. And when it comes to a small group or duo, it's really about, I think it's at the end of the day, it's about conversation. Not that you always have to have the same opinion.
Oh yeah.
And for those who don't know, like Matt and I, you know, got to know each other pretty early on in our careers. And even though we parted ways in terms of like what we pursued within the industry, I think anytime we were to reconnect, like there was always something to talk about, right? It was never just like formalities and, well, that's great. Like I'm glad you're alive.
LinkedIn speak.
Like,
yeah. LinkedIn speak.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how some conversations are these days, where it's like, the first conversation me and Will had, we actually like just got together on a Discord call and we're just like shooting the shit about like what we actually wanted to do. And there was a small like moment where I was sitting there and was just like, Will, why are we talking like we're in a business meeting right now? Well, why are we talking like we're trying to pitch each other a project?
Yeah, habit.
No, it's totally a habit, because for us, it's a very weird thing with working in esports, is that you're always on these calls that you're trying to like make the best impression, or you're trying to like sell the like ideal of a vision, and it's very weird to kind of like separate that sometimes. I guess that's a good place to start, actually, if you wanted to like, how did we? I was trying to think of what my earliest memory of working with you was, and I actually thought about it. I remembered were you?
I'm afraid you're going to remember further back.
A little bit. So I guess how about you just like go into your like who are you kind of thing, and I'll go into mine, and then we can talk about that.
We can go from there.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I have maybe a bit more story before like meeting you, right, in terms of my career. But I was doing like a lot of volunteer stuff, specifically revolving around League of Legends. But it really culminated into, I was recording that whole Dr. Pepper MLG Ultimate Fan thing. And that's where I met Monty, because he was casting for MLG Summer Arena and Optimus Tom alongside a bunch of others, and got introduced to them. Monty had shown interest in the work I was available to do. So then I was able to join GG Chronicles, which for those of you guys who maybe aren't OG League of Legends fans, like GG Chronicles was kind of the place to go to really follow the very early onset of League of Legends esports, especially at a global level. So that's where I met you, as we were starting to work on different topics. But my strongest memory of you back in the GG Chronicles days was the whole what's the actual, is it live blogging?
Oh yeah.
Of matches.
Yeah.
Because you had helped kind of set that up and like teach us how to do it well. And I thought it was a really cool thing, because for me, like, I'm always very interested in more analog style of media, right? Whether it's that type of like ticker, whether it's radio.
Yeah.
So to me, I was like, this is very cool, right? It's available for those people maybe who can't, because that's how I used to follow baseball sometimes. If I couldn't watch the games or listen to the radio, I would just read the tickers. So that's my strongest memory of working with you in the very beginning. But I don't know if you have other memories of, because you were there before me, right?
That's like the limit of my memory is like that is that it is not that specific. I didn't even remember the live blogging thing. So I guess a little bit of a context is like when I was working with like I got my esports start in League of Legends because I was a Dyrus fanboy. I was really into watching Dyrus when I was starting to play League of Legends, and the first esports I ever watched was the Honcast. Actually, it was Heroes of New Earth. I don't know how I stumbled on it. I don't know why specifically Heroes of New Earth over anything else, but I started watching VODs on my dinner because I was in university. I was in my like third year of university, and I would make dinner. I would go set up my desk at my computer like I am like right now, and I would put on an episode of the Honcast, and I would just like watch Heroes of New Earth, because I had played MOBAs. I'd played Dota 1 back in like I'd played Dota 1 back in high school, and terribly garbage, but I knew what MOBAs were. So but eventually, like, the lore of League of Legends really pulled me in, and I was looking for a streamer because I was terrible. So I really enjoyed Dyrus, and then Dyrus joined TSM, and then Dyrus joining TSM at the time led me to actually like following esports. And it was such a weird thing because at the time I was in journalism school, and I was like, this isn't going to turn into work. I shouldn't turn this into work. And eventually, I think I was posting on like either Reddit or the League of Legends forums or something like that, and I ran into one of the people that volunteered. His name is Adam. I don't remember. It was one of the like admins of GG Chronicle, and I was just like, okay, do you need someone to like do volunteer work or whatever? And they kind of already knew what I was doing. I don't remember if I was doing my own writing or something like that at that point, but basically, like,
I want to say you were, because I remember my impression of you was like, oh, this guy has been like
doing stuff. This. Yeah. That's what I think. I think
that was my impression.
I was just surprised because when I talked to the admin, I think his name was SK Pone or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, Pone.
Yeah, Pone. Exactly. He was like familiar with my work already, and I was like surprised. It was like, oh God, someone's actually read my stuff. And like he thought I was like a professional journalist already, and I'm just like, dude, I'm still in school. Like I'm not shit. So the live blogging thing is funny that you mentioned, because that was by that time I started in esports or watching esports when I was still in school, but I didn't start taking it seriously until I was like graduating and was like, oh, I don't want to work in like conventional media. I don't want to work for like the Canadian National Broadcaster. I don't want to work for a newspaper. So let's just see what this esports thing's all about. Or like I knew that esports was going to take off and it was going to need professional journalists. So I was like, okay, this is, let's
Right.
just try this. Let's just see how far we can take this. So the live blogging thing was because I was working at a company that did the software, and I was like,
Yeah,
so I got a free
that's what it
license.
was.
So I got a free license, and I was like, okay, let's just see what we can do with it. But my first memory of working with you was season 2 world champions. It was season 2 world champions for
Oh.
League, because I think you and Monte Cristo were at the event, and
Yes.
you needed
yeah.
someone to put together the video for, I think, a Captain Jack interview, who was on Azubu Blaze at the time.
Yep.
You
Yep,
interviewed him, and we were in the IRC, because this is how old we are, is that there was no Discord.
Yeah.
We were in the IRC channel for GG Chronicle, and someone was someone who usually did it couldn't do it or something like that, and someone was like,
Oh yeah.
oh, we need someone. We got this Captain Jack interview. We need someone to throw the GG Chronicle logo in front of it and upload it to the channel.
Right.
And that was my, for like the first time I'd done anything video for GG Chronicle, or like doing any of that. I needed to get the logins and the video or whatever, but no one else could do it. And that was my earliest memory of working with you anyway, was you doing that interview and me being like, okay, let's just get this done,
Gotcha.
get this done properly, whatever, getting it all tagged properly and whatever. And yeah, here we are.
Wow.
Like, you going to like MLG, and like obviously we can kind of go into that, but like, yeah, you going to MLG, like working broadcasts and stuff like that, and then going to Korea, and then like us crossing paths in Korea again, that for winter 2012-13, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, 13 going into 14.
It was
probably.
the Najin Sword versus Azubu Frost
Oh
finals.
my gosh, you remember which matchup it
Yeah,
was.
yeah. I went to
Jeez.
Korea for the first time. How could I
Well,
not?
That's true. For you, it was like a much
for me,
bigger
for me it was a much bigger. So okay, I guess it's easier to go through like a smaller personal history, like from that. It's like there's a lot of stuff we're talking about that obviously like people who are listening aren't going to be privy to, but
there's so much we can cover.
yeah, exactly.
time-wise,
But
right?
I guess
It's freaking
small
10 years.
small like compression of that timeline is like I went from working with GG Chronicle to doing more freelancing for Riot when I helped like we did the
Right.
initial like rollout of LoL Esports. I did a contract for Riot. I did contract for Azubu, which was hilarious considering like what's gone on since then, but
Oh.
I know. And then I helped start the Score Esports, which was a newsroom. They're just a YouTube channel right now. They just do video and explainers and that kind of stuff. But at the start, we were like a full-fledged newsroom and like app
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. Burned out really hard from that, and that was kind of like my exit from like the journalism side of things. And eventually, I started doing more contracts and stuff for social media. I ended up at Evil Geniuses doing social media for them, and that turned into like 2.5 years. That was like my longest employment. There was always this weird thing where I would work somewhere and I would make it to like 11 months and then I would leave. It happened twice in a row.
It's hard. The first
That first year.
like, a full year is harder than most people think. If you haven't worked like a full-time job, right?
Yeah.
It's different from contracts or whatnot. But sticking with one thing for a full year, and I don't think it's a matter of like, oh, like some people will obviously be, oh, millennials just don't stick with things. I don't think it's that. I think it's just hard for anybody, and it just takes some time to learn to A, obviously find the right place, but B, how do you adjust within that to like get over that hump.
I think there's an anxiety around it too, because I remember talking to Red Eye about this. I
Yeah.
brought this up to Red Eye when I was burning out from the Score Esports. This was around TI5, and I went to the group stages of TI5, and I talked to Red Eye about, I'm thinking about leaving. I'm kind of like anxious, whatever. And he was like, usually around a year I get anxious too, and that's usually when I'm trying to figure out whether I'm at the right place or not. And that kind of gave me a lot of comfort.
Yeah.
Where I was at the time, I was like, oh God, this is like the perfect job. Why am I leaving? And Red Eye told me something that I always remember. And it's, he talked to me, or he said to me, he was like, do you think this is your last job in esports? And I was like, oh, that like instantly like put the entire thing in perspective, where I was like, oh, I'm talented. I have a decent resume at this point. I've done a lot. This isn't going to be my last job in esports. And it made a lot of sense. So, did social media at Evil Geniuses after that. Ironically,
Right.
that TI5, Evil Geniuses win. I actually didn't like Evil Geniuses as a team or like a company. And then I started working for them. and it wasn't like it wasn't
Wait, really?
it wasn't like a hate. It was one of those things because they always beat the teams that I liked, or like they had the
okay,
like
I mean, they were a powerhouse.
yeah, they were a powerhouse, or I always thought they were like cocky, or I always thought they were like, oh, they have a lot of money, so they just buy talent kind of thing, like all the stuff that they want you to think, right? And then eventually that's where I end up finding work and end up working for 2.5 years. I ended up leaving them in October of this year, so we're in March at the moment, so it's been a couple months. But now I work for chillhop.com. They're a music label, and basically their CEO used to play Dota semi-pro, and this is years and years and years ago, so like nothing serious. Like it's not like he has a Wikipedia article or anything like that, but he he's played like high level pubs with some EU pros back in the day, and so him starting his music label and working for it for a bunch of years or whatever, it's like 8 years old at this point. He's always had like a really good mind for gaming and stuff like that. He always like wants to get involved with streaming and Twitch, and like they take a lot of cues from Monster Cat. They're very big into they work really closely with Monster Cat. Like they're technically our like competition, but we also take a lot of cues from how they handle things, and that's really cool.
Smart.
Yeah. So when I was leaving, I was applying for a job. I saw that they needed someone to like run like a social media account or like something, and I sent them an email. It was like 15 hours a week or something, and I was just looking for something to maybe like cover my rent or whatever now that I was leaving. And like Red Eye said, it was like, do you think this is your last job in esports? They emailed me back and were like, don't apply for this job. We can use you better than that. Like we know what you're doing, and we have an idea for having someone to handle gaming for us anyway. And so sit tight, finish your stuff with EG. We'll talk about this later, because I didn't want to just like jump from one job that I was like kind of burning out from to another one. And that's a kind of a bad habit that will probably be a topic for a podcast eventually, is that like I work until I burn out at a job. Definitely. I work until I burn out at a job, and I usually throw my entire being into a job, and that's what leads me to burn out. But I needed to like leave EG, or not anything that was like wrong with the company. It was just like myself. I wasn't really taking care of my health very well. But yeah, that was like such a weird thing where I was sitting there and I was like, oh, this is like other people telling me that I'm good, if that makes sense. Like it's someone else going out. Totally. It's someone going out of their way to say you're bigger than like what you're applying for in this case. So we've been trying to like figure out like where best to use me, but like I have a head of gaming role. That's like my title at the moment. But basically I just handle I handle like working with game developers. I handle working with streamers, because like we have a really permissive like license for our music, and yeah, that's basically my job now. And like I'm trying to like take on other projects like this, and just to kind of keep myself busy, but also to kind of understand what streamers and podcasters and creators like need out of our music. And what you were saying earlier about like we just, you like to experiment, or you like to kind of just like see what you can do in terms of just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks for a project. It's like, that's what you need to do. Right. You can't always be lucky enough to like get work in like a fully functional environment. You almost have to like just do it yourself. And then you learn so much about like what is good or bad or hard or easy about that project. And then sometimes it works out. So, I don't know. I've gone through my spiel.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, just on the last note, obviously, again, everything we talk about, we could always, dive
exactly
into that as the topic. But just as a note for people listening, I think more so for obviously creative projects than anything else. But even other things, it's like, while it's true, not everyone always has the luxury to just like throw things at the wall all the time, but throwing things at the wall doesn't mean you have to put all your eggs in the basket, right? There's different levels you can do it on. So I think that's something to just keep in mind for people who are maybe looking just for work in general, or maybe a direction of where they want to grow their careers. Obviously we're technically, in the grand scheme of things, we're still pretty early on in our careers, but
which is weird. It's been 8 years.
It is
8 years for me. In esports.
That's true. Maybe I should stop.
We're old.
We're like middle age within our career.
I turned 30 this year, and I was like, damn.
The big
The
3-0.
big 3-0, but it's also the thought of like how many people are coming up under us. You know, it's I thought about what
There's a lot.
I thought about who is in our generation, if that makes sense. And I don't know if it's weird to think about it in that way of
You mean like people who have worked in that same
it's definitely an era thing. Like if you think about it, it's definitely like an era thing where
like a career
I always
path.
think of like Kelsey Moser and Finn on Fire, like Tyler for ESPN and Emily Rand and like there were definitely a lot of people that were around at that first LCS season that weren't professionals yet, that were still in that volunteer stage. And like you were saying, Optimus Tom, like a lot of people who are working at Riot now, who stayed in the league ecosystem. We all started volunteering and trying to make something happen all at the same time. And like there are people that, like if you think, like I said, generation wise, it's like you think about Nick Allen or you think about Hat Person. Nick Allen's at Loaded now, I think, or Pop Dog or whichever one that is, and Hat Person's at Riot, just started at Riot, and those people came before us. Those people were kind of like the generation before us because they were doing things like the Ultimate Gamer. Like I think about like, you know, Rachel Seltzer, you know, like Rachel Quirko.
Yeah.
I don't consider her and I the same generation of worker, if that makes sense. I consider her
definitely not.
She's older esports than I am, and I'm not sorry, Rachel, I'm not, you know, saying you're old. I'm more just saying
she just stepped into it.
Yeah,
early,
it's like
right? Regardless
it's
of
like
age,
the Anna Prossers, and it's like the Jeff Robinsons, rest in peace. It's like those people like definitely were proto like what we were doing, where they were doing the like StarCraft LANs and stuff back like pre 2010. I guess maybe is a good way of looking at it. And then like we kind of either looked at them or they were the people that were doing the hosting and stuff before we were while we were still fans, I guess. And then we kind of started volunteering and I guess like now we're seeing, like I said, generation wise, we're seeing people that are starting post LCS, like post start of LCS, you know, and I
that's a good time. Yeah, it's a good landmark for.
Well, it's also, I think the thought is another way I thought about it was Immortals, because I think Immortals is the first brand. Like you've got Cloud9 that came in after TSM, like Immortals the team, and you've got LCS starting with all the like big teams that were competing pre-LCS. Which, so you've got the Dignitoses, you've got the Curses, you've got Team Liquid, EG, you know, TSM, but then Cloud9 starts season 3 of LCS, and Cloud9 is like the first team that comes in from scratch that is good enough to take games off of like TSM, CLG. And then you've got in season 4 of LCS, you've got Immortals coming in. And I think that's like that's a good marker of new generation. It's not like Cloud9 is the transition, because those guys were still playing for like Quantic and like those kind of like you know, that kind of stuff. And Immortals is like, oh, this is new kind of team, new kind of way of looking at it. That's kind of when like 100 Thieves and stuff is starting. Like I think Nadeshot is still at Optic at this point, but that's kind of like the transition between generations. And like I said, there are people that are working at orgs right now, at LCS orgs or at other franchise orgs that have no experience at the LCS level of things. Or maybe they were working volunteer, maybe they were working for like academy teams and stuff. But there are people who have started their esports careers that didn't necessarily need that. I don't want to say they didn't need that volunteer experience, because they were probably volunteering, but their first job was probably an LCS franchise. And that's pretty different than how we were brought up, if that makes sense, I think.
Well, the opportunities were more apparent and more available. Obviously, still very limited, but you know, not to say that like, hey, anyone can get a full-time job in esports. Not saying that, but it became more systemic. It became more widespread, and I think more than anything, I always think about it. I think it just became more apparent, right? Yeah. For instance, you know, when I started looking for work, I guess, a little bit more seriously within esports, I still didn't know like what was doable, right? I didn't know people were on like somewhat of a contract basis with MLG, or some were even obviously full time. Like I didn't know how any of that worked So then there I was, like, going into R-New on our League of Legends and being like, hey, anybody like running a community tournament today, right? Like that's the world we lived in, because nothing was on the headline.
Oh no, totally.
Right? Even if it was and also obviously the organizations were not confident enough to like invest all a long-term systemic fund into maintaining more personnel, and that all has changed, and it continues to change. But it is very interesting to think about, and now that we're talking about it, it's really putting things into perspective, even for me, of like what 8 to 10 years can really do. Because I don't really think about that too often. Right, I don't think I obviously think about the big picture of like you said, like, oh, LCS started and like TI, and we have all these big landmarks, and I see the big flow of things. But then, like you said, I think about it, and I was sitting there season 2 Worlds, like you said, when Monty and Shocks was there, and we met as journalists, but both for like not at like full-time level, right? And like both of us were like dinky camera and like trying to just get interviews, and if we got it, we got it. If not, like, oh well, this was a cool
if you had a voice
experience.
recorder,
Like,
if voice recorders were like I've put like $100 or like $50 into making sure I have decent audio. It's like people with actual like microphones were like, it was still a rarity, if that makes sense, because you had to buy that equipment yourself,
and so
you had to buy and maintain that equipment yourself.
Right. It wasn't
so
funded.
you had to get that voice
So
recorder, and that was how you synced the audio to your interview, instead of, God forbid, doing the onboard like audio for your camera. But I think something that is
so lots of change.
Well, I think something to bring up is that like from us, like we were volunteering and looking for our own opportunities, but the opportunities that were arising weren't at the team level, they were at the developer level, or they were at the company level, where it was like, oh, you do the journalism thing, then maybe Riot will hire you, or you do the journalism thing, or you do the content thing, and maybe MLG hires you. And then instead of working for an individual team, you're covering the game, not the team. And that was a thing that I had trouble with when I went to EG, was, I don't have to cover the entirety of the game. I don't have to hunt down individual information and become comfortable enough with the team that they can trust me with exclusives. I'm only covering one team, and they have the information that they need to give to me, and I don't have to hunt that down. So that was like a big change for me, where I was like, this is easier. But it took a lot of time for teams to have the budget and understand what the advantage was to having a full-time person. And that was one of the things that when I was coming into EG, like I kind of came to them and said, well, teams in general had always worked a lot on volunteer labor, and that's something that we're going to get into. But like for me, I just said, okay, well, EG Dota is going to China. We've got 3 other divisions, or however many we did at the time. You need someone to cover those people full time. And if you want to have, like, I have training with it, I have experience with it. You can hire one person part-time to manage like 10 volunteers that might not have the time or the schedule or the expertise to cover these individual games. Or you can hire one person that is dedicated full-time to being able to wake up and do that, and follow that schedule and make sure everything's consistent for your sponsors. And like I said, it's generationally, like, you think about something I've really kept in my rear view is that there's still a humility, where it's like, we didn't do like the CGS, like we weren't I wasn't old enough to do.
No, sure. I mean, there was way more stuff.
Yeah, CGS being this like trying to bring Counter-Strike to TV for the first time in like mid 2000s. It's like we're still relatively like, I hesitate to use the word privileged, but we're relatively like lucky, I guess, that when we came in, things were still developed enough that we didn't have to work on a pure volunteer basis for like longer than a year, if that makes sense. Like, we maybe put in a year and got our portfolios together, and then there was at least opportunity by that time. Like, we came at a really good time where money was big enough that it was clear that things were worth paying for. And then like eventually the individual career stuff, like maybe, working full time with benefits or something like that. That came in, like, that was a logical progression for us, where there was definitely times for the people that came before us that they were just working contracts or barely getting paid at all, or they were maybe getting their accommodations and flight paid for if they were lucky. Like that was a luxury, right? So we kind of came in on a really perfect time where there was a good enough ramp, if that makes sense, from volunteer to contract to full time. And I don't know, I just kind of think about it as like, oh God, this was like perfect timing for me anyway, coming out of school. But I kind of went through my personal history. I went through my personal history. I keep meaning to throw back to you, and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to ignore Will here.
Oh yeah,
but,
of course.
I don't know.
No worries. We'll cover it here a little bit. I think as we're covering that, like you said, the notion of, I think, obviously there have been other turning points and developments within esports throughout, but I think that was like a big overarching like actual turning point, or like a whole new book, right? Whereas since then we've had many chapters, like you said, with different orgs, etc. But on that note, I think both of our careers show that, like you've gone through yours and showing that progression. Obviously for me, more so focused on the production end, but for those who don't know, after GG Chronicles, eventually I casted a little bit shortly for MLG, for League of Legends, and then eventually moved to Korea to work for OGN alongside Monty and Doa within the global team. But I came to Korea in a very different situation than Monty and Doa did, right? Monty and Doa were there purely as commentators and talent. Obviously they were giving their input and they could be a part of that, but there were multiple things attributing to it, one of which is obviously the language barrier, where they couldn't always be a part of the conversation easily on either side. And so I was brought in as kind of this backup talent if need be, right? If someone needed to take a break or if they were sick, but also helping facilitate a lot of that stuff on the back end. So for me, a lot of my early days in OGN was like, moderating to the Twitch channel, running the OGN Twitter at the time, and helping just set up all of this stuff so they could at least have something that's even going on globally, instead of just like putting on a stream and forgetting about it. Since then, obviously just worked on a bunch of back end stuff within OGN, but what a lot of people don't realize is even then I was still on a contract basis, not necessarily because of the industry, because obviously Korea's had esports with full-time jobs for quite a while, but it was a combination of that, plus obviously the global scene was not, was pretty new even for Korea, and then obviously coming from America, there were other things to take into account if it wanted to turn into full-time. So everything I did at OGN was technically still as a contractor. But that included things like, helping with business deals and meetings, because, a lot of times you're dealing with global partners when it comes to developers and publishers. So I was exposed to pretty much almost every, I guess, aspect of the esports industry. Not necessarily all in detail, but I had something to do with it, or at least got to watch it, close up. So that was very eye-opening for me. From there, eventually started doing more talent work within OGN, as OGN started doing more games and more global broadcast and content. But with that, what I realized was, if I want to do more main state content in English, it's just not going to happen in Korea, right? It will always be secondary, because obviously the main audience is Korea. It doesn't matter. What a lot of people don't realize is it doesn't matter that the global audience is bigger. At the end of the day, OGN needs to make money in Korea. Like, that's their main source of income, and the Korean economy and the Korean audience is obviously more limited. So from that, I thought about it a little. We talked a little bit, and it just so happened that was when Red Eye left ESL. So there was an opening there for ESL to want someone to kind of pick up the torch and try to fill in the shoes however best they can in terms of being a host, a main host for ESL events. So I joined there with the idea that I would also start to grow myself as a producer, because I had started dabbling more in that within OGN, as some of the producers, the OG producers at OGN, kind of took me under their wing. So I went to ESL America. For the first 7 to 8 months, I was traveling 3 weeks out of 4 to events, hosting like Dota 1 week, CSGO the next week, back to StarCraft, and then maybe a little League of Legends, and then back to something else. So that was kind of the heyday of my talent work. But then ESL America grew pretty quickly, and we started just having to run our own shows in a self-sustaining manner. So in a way, I was kind of thrown to the wolves in picking up and just running shows on my own, right? Even though so I had a big jump, right? I was like starting to learn producing. Obviously, I had learned a lot indirectly at OGN, and then we go in and just things needed to get done. So jump right into the hot seat. But sometimes that's the best way to learn, right? And I thank the situation in ESL for that forever, because it was such a big experience. And honestly, within that like second to third year that I was at ESL for about 4 years. I probably learned the most, right? Because things were just changing so rapidly, especially in North America during those years. For those unaware, that would be around like 2016, 2017, right? So LCS started really growing on its own, and Riot was internalizing everything. TI was just taking over everything in terms of prize money. All these big changes were coming to what was working, and then supplemental content and all these experiments.
We were catching up to what sports were doing.
So I worked
we were catching up to what traditional sports were doing, and
very quickly, and trying to exceed it right in a moment's notice. And so I was pretty much on creative production at ESL for the first 3 years, and then the last year and a half, we had started needing to branch out a little bit. And I think because of the experiences I had at OGN. Not that I was like an expert necessarily on, whether it's business or logistics, but I at least understood kind of the needs that could happen right from different directions and different departments, just because I was exposed to it so much. So eventually I moved on to a business development role within ESL in North America before leaving early last year for me. So it's been about a little over a year actually since I've left a full-time job. And then last year, I did some contract work, whether it's as a producer, as talent, like I was at WCG as talent, just hopping around just so, I can make sure I'm warmed up. But for me, I've been looking for kind of what is the next thing I really want to invest into, rather than, just do event by event just for the sake of a paycheck.
Yeah.
Because then I don't think that's fair to me. I don't think that's fair to others who want to really invest into that as a long-term career. So that's where I'm at right now. But again, I think both of our careers show that, how things have changed and where things have started within our time.
Yeah, because like I know you've done like a lot of different games, because like there were times where I would like, yeah, I was gonna say there were times where I'd see your Twitter or whatever, you becoming like covering like Crossfire or something like that, and that was like the one thing that I could never kind of like understand. Not I couldn't understand, but probably we weigh differently, if that makes sense. Like, I think about, again, bringing up Rachel Seltzer. She does like every game under the sun. She will host every tournament or anything that like, and she will put her damn best effort into it. And that's one of the things I admire about her. But for me, I need to like what I'm doing. And maybe that's a bad way of putting it, but it's like I need a personal investment in what I'm doing, and that's potentially why I burn out so hard when it comes to working, is that I tend to need that personal like attachment to it. And even with EG, that was something that I noticed like maybe a year and a half in, where I was like, oh, there are these games that I normally wouldn't pay attention to personally, because I don't play Call of Duty. I don't play like we had an Overwatch team for like 3 months before OWL. Sure. We had like, PUBG and Fortnite and like all these games that I normally, fighting games was a big one where, that's a large time investment when you're covering it from like a coverage perspective. And it being EG and at least like seeing how our fans were reacting to it was like the way of onboarding myself. But about a year and a half into it, I was kind of thinking, or I needed a second person, because we were adding new games and I couldn't keep bouncing around sleep schedules, because we would have like the big wave was Rainbow Six and Rocket League were pretty like close to each other in terms of picking them up, and those had weekly online tournaments and stuff like that. And then COD was pretty much at a tournament every week, or like once a month pretty much, and then doing their weekly leagues and stuff. So going between EST, PST, Dota's in China, Dota's in Southeast Asia, Dota's in Russia, or something like that, it's like I needed a second person. And
well, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for the job you had, especially specifically at EG, was that it needed to be live coverage, right? So I think that's the big difference. The way, and I can't necessarily speak for people like Red Eye or Rachel, but on my end, when I was jumping around different games, it was more like I was cramming for a test every time, right? So
it was a sprint.
Like if I'm on a Dota week, yeah, I would just recap everything in Dota, and then if the next week's CS:GO, and maybe this week there was another CS:GO term, I wouldn't care about it. I would just focus on Dota, and as soon as the event ends and I'm on the plane, now I like erase everything in my head about Dota, and then I just pick up everything that happened in the past like 3 weeks about CS:GO, right? So that's why I think it was more like even remotely feasible. Whereas when you have to do live coverage, especially for it, even if it's only for one team, like you just have to. You have to make sure you're following the flow. Like you said, you have to adjust time zones and all of that, and that's a whole different.
The thought is,
animal.
though, is like something that I always brought to social coverage was that we need to make sure that people understand that we're paying attention. If anything, the team needs to be the most enthusiastic person in the room, because if we aren't enthusiastic, why should our fans be enthusiastic? So like, there's a thought of, you don't want to be too nerdy, if that makes sense, about like what details you're presenting, because I don't want to say it's embarrassing, but it's almost like okay, you're getting a little too much into it, but it's like, no, you want to enable your fan base to know it's okay to be that into your product, and that's something that like you want to make sure that as a team account anyway, that you don't look like you're lazy about your own product. So when we were coming towards hiring a second person, it was really difficult because we needed someone that wasn't just an EG Dota fan. We needed someone that was like versatile enough to cover everything and to be like, for me, I was lucky enough that I could find something exciting about every game that we were playing. And in my off time, I'd be looking up wikis or whatever just to like understand like how the culture of the game was or like what needed to happen. But trying to find someone, if someone doesn't know Dota, you can't force them to like Dota. Like if they don't like it, you can't force them to dive into it. Even if you're paying them full time, you can't force them to do that, because you can't just watch Dota just to cover it and then get as much as you need in order to like explain about it, because that's not a game you just dip your toes into. So eventually I just hired someone to do everything but Dota, and I covered everything, but like I was still the Dota guy. And I think that was that was a big eye opener for me, because I was just thinking, oh, this is what's valuable about me. And I'm not trying to just like talk myself up, but like that's like a unique quality that esports employees need to have. And it was so surprising for me to actually like realize and be like, oh, the knowledge I have in games and my ability to pick up games and find something interesting about them is valuable in itself. And not everyone has that same talent. And that's something that I think is kind of like the same about no matter what you're doing. It's like you have to at least have you can't just walk to work and do 9 to 5 and then come home. Like that doesn't really exist in esports. You need to have some kind of like deeper attachment to it. And I don't know. I don't really know where I was going with that point, but like,
well, I think as you were mentioning, well, to me, the way I see it, I do see, I mean, I guess technically 3 different, branches, right? So one is the more versatile, able to find interest in various aspects of esports, and I want to talk about that in a second here a little bit more deeply. One is obviously the like super hardcore experts, right? People who like dive into one game, whether it's the content for that game, whether it's analysis. And I think there's a place for that. Like you said, I think it is actually higher at risk for burnout, but that's a whole different scenario. And then the third branch would be obviously there at the end of the day, esports is a business, so any business needs a lot of back end that's not as invested into the front end, right? So there is that, for especially for people who, we see those questions all the time, like how do I get into esports? Well, these days there are those options, but before because that's a whole different thing we can cover.
Different episode, probably.
Separate episode. Talking about the kind of finding interest in different things. It was interesting to me that you mentioned, how you had to adjust to covering different games or finding interest in different games. Because for me, what I always found, at least within my within the people I knew closely within esports, not everyone, but the close circle I had, probably because I started on the talent side, and talent side generally people are more focused onto games, single games, or the games themselves. For me, it was always, I liked video games, and then I liked production, right? So to me, that was the balance, and so being able to, or finding different games, if anything, was kind of a plus for me. But this is something we talked about as we were, just discussing different ideas leading up to this week was these days there's so many different games that come out, right? And especially even more so on the esports front, I feel, right? Everyone's announcing an esport, everyone's announcing a new title, and I think sometimes whether it's us as people who work, especially as maybe contractors are in a different area of esports, or even fans, it can get a little overwhelming. And I want to know from your end, having had to cover multiple different things at EG now and made that shift, like how do you face that, or what do you think about that scenario now that you're, I guess, a step away from it, right? You're looking at it.
Sorry, I just blanked there for a second. What scenario were you saying? Sorry.
With all the like different games coming out and new titles, and new leagues.
That's the thing,
like,
is
we talked about this whole
FOMO,
we
were talking about FOMO. Like that was the thing that we majorly wanted to cover this episode, was the idea of fear of missing out. So it's FOMO, and it's different for us because every opportunity, or like every game, represents a new opportunity for potential work. And for me, that's the way I look at it anyway, is like you're looking at thinking, because we've worked in times in esports where things aren't stable, we can really recognize what like the value of stability and the value of like when publishers or developers present like very stable opportunities. And I don't know about you, but like for me, definitely, like I'm getting older. Like I want to have a family one day. I want to have a retirement. Like I want to be able to like put money away and save and like stuff like that. And generally a good idea, but it's also a thing where like this is a luxury profession at the end of the day. Like it's the same kind of thing where you would look at it like working in any entertainment industry, where working in the industry itself is almost its own like plus. Like being able to say that I have a flexible schedule and I get to cover something I enjoy is almost its own luxury. But at the end of the day, I still want to be able to have like a stable life, like a future life, if that makes sense, in terms of, how I'm able to support people, or how I'm able to like not be working till the day I die kind of thing. So anytime you look at a new title coming out, especially from specific developers, you're looking at, okay, is this something that is going to be like not just a flavor of the month or flavor of a couple of years? Is it going to be something that lives for a really long time? Yeah. And it's similar with the LCS. There are people that have been working with the LCS since it started, and I can't imagine doing that. If that makes sense. It's like, it's not a bad thing. If they're as interested in League of Legends, like I said, I've been in this 8 years. I don't think I could be excited about League of Legends after 8 years straight. I can't imagine the level of like attachment to that community and game. Like I guess that my tastes have changed over time, and which isn't a bad thing. Like either way, it's just like for me, like I said, I go really hard in terms of like how much I identify myself with the game that I'm playing and that kind of stuff, or like the game that I'm covering and working for. And I guess where the origins of this like FOMO talk was, all the stuff that Riot's putting out was, for me, I started in League of Legends and I fell out of League of Legends because when I was working at the Score, they needed someone to cover Dota. And I had a very, very, very small, I watched TI3. Like, that was my experience, was like, I watched the TI3 Grand Finals because everyone was saying that Na'Vi versus Alliance was crazy. So I decided to watch it, and that was it. Like, that was my Dota experience. But because they needed someone there, that ended up being my thing at the Score. And that turned into me going to TI, me meeting people at TI, and then that kind of like spiraling out into what I've done today. I owe a lot to Dota because that was the path towards where I currently am. But in the process, I never really like, it's not like I shit on League of Legends, and there's the first swear. I was like, how long is it going to take for me to curse? I never really, I think there's that weird like inferiority complex, I guess, that certain games have towards like bigger ones, or like more like that's another whole topic. I'm not trying to get into this drama.
I'm interested in what you're about to say, because that
is like pretty dangerous territory. I don't want to go into that, but right now, maybe that's a topic for another day.
No,
but I'm more just saying is like, I don't have an interest in League at the moment. Like, I haven't played League of Legends in maybe a year. I log on every once in a while and I say, I want to play Dota because my friends play Dota and I want to get better at it. So maybe League is the like low impact, like not saying in this type of the game, but how I take it is I don't care if I lose at I don't care if I lose at League of Legends. When I had a binge on Heroes of the Storm for like a month or two. All I played was the medic character in Heroes of the Storm because I was this is something that doesn't have any kind of weight behind it, where I'm like, I can play and I can lose and I don't care. Like, it isn't a well, not that I'm invested in, but there's less consequences, if that makes sense. There's less consequences because when I go on a solo losing streak in Dota, I'm thinking, I'm already the worst player on my stack of friends, so I'm not improving, so they aren't going to want to play with me anymore. I know that's a stupid spiral, but at the same time, it's like, I want to get better so that I can be better.
It's pretty
I want to be like, it's like playing pickup basketball, right? If all the other people on your pickup basketball team are
that's good.
Better than you or more athletic, you don't want to be the person that like, that's a personal pride thing for me, is I don't want to be a handicap to my team. I want to be better. So that's the thing I've struggled with Dota, and I think it's a unique problem for when I'm playing it. Working and playing around Dota, is I want to play and get better because I want to be a better asset to my stack. And I don't think that they're the type of people that, just because I'm bad, they won't invite me to Dota. But from a personal pride perspective, I want to be better. But at the same time, because I'm so invested in it for work, it makes it really hard for me to like fiend Dota in my off hours because I'm so around it that I just don't want to be around it anymore. So where I'm going with this, going back around to League of Legends and stuff, is that like I fell out of that ecosystem really hard. And because I fell out of that ecosystem changed and grew in a way that left me behind, so to speak. Where like the LCS is a completely different beast now, and the Riot ecosystem is a completely different beast now in terms of, the K-pop and the Louis Vuitton and the whole cultural thing behind it. So when Riot announces that they're like, we're doing a card game, we're doing a fighting game, we're doing a tactical FPS, for me, I panic a little bit inside because I'm like, Riot has a shit ton of money. Riot has so much money that they can do whatever they want. They can, and especially for certain genres, fighting games especially, Riot's going to eat Capcom's lunch. Riot is going to do online fighters so much better than every Japanese company that's doing a fighting game right now, that they have an opportunity to be the fighting game for people. It's like with Overwatch. Overwatch introduced so many people to FPSs that didn't play FPSs before because they did the same model as Riot. Is they said, make character designs and make an IP that people really attach themselves to, make every player have a spot on a team regardless of how good they are, and then make them so invested that they don't want to leave that ecosystem. And that's the same thing with all these different League games that are coming out, or Valorant, or what's like the League of Legends world and the IP, Valorant? Not just the game, but I forget what the Runeterra. Yeah, Runeterra. Like, that's the name of their big IP. And by having all these different games with Runeterra characters, like the characters from League or the environments from League or whatever, you encourage people to stay within that ecosystem. You say, I don't need to go to Hearthstone if I want to play a card game. I don't need to go to Magic the Gathering if I want to play a card game. There's a Runeterra card game that I am already familiar with. And because I'm already invested in the Riot ecosystem, I don't need to leave. And so when they're adding all these games and they're releasing all these games, and I'm not necessarily invested in Runeterra, but I look at Runeterra and say, like the Runeterra universe, expanded cinematic universe, gaming universe, whatever, and say, that might be where I find my next paycheck or my next career, or that might cannibalize the career that I have going right now. How do I force myself to be excited about it when I'm not? It's like with Valorant, like the FPS game they have coming out. I fell off really hard of Overwatch. I have no interest in Valorant, but we're seeing people that they recognize the cycle of new game comes out, teams recruit for a new game, we saw it with Apex, where when Apex had its initial boom, everyone was looking for an Apex team, or everyone was an Apex player looking to be on a team. So they see the cycle, right? They see if I get in early, and if I become, it's like with the idea of a new game comes out, I want to be the streamer for it, because there's a benefit to being the number one streamer for this game if it blows up. It might be before it even blows up, but they know what happened to Ninja, right? For being the Fortnite streamer. So every new game that comes out, you're going to have that one person who's going super fucking hard in it because they want to be that number one streamer, because there's benefit to doing it. So Valorant gets announced, and all of a sudden all these CSGO players that couldn't make it on big teams, or Apex or Overwatch players who couldn't make it on big teams, they say Riot's going to have a big league. Riot's going to have an LCS for Valorant. They have to, because they're big. They have tons of money. They have Tencent money. Sure. They have to do that. So if I can get in on the ground floor of that, I can make money and I can have a career, right? But how do you force, there are people who can force that way of thinking a lot more independent of whether they actually like the game or not, because they're seeing the title and the company and the infrastructure as opportunity, rather than I like the game, so then I'm going to devote my life to making content around it,
Well, yeah, I want to step in, and I think you kind of pinpointed the difference, right? I think, and again, I want to make it very clear that as we're talking about this, I don't think either of us, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think either of us think either of those thoughts are wrong, right? It's just different. But as you were talking and as I was listening, I think what you said was accurate in that most of the people who are more active about that, right, about being the first, are generally people who are still looking for a way in at all. You know what I mean? Just at all, just even their toe into the door, right? And at that point, in some while the percentage of success on that is still low, right? There's the one streamer, or the 5 teams or whatever. It's still low, but it seems like a better lottery, when you're just thinking about it. I don't know,
of course. There's no statistics. That's the funny thing, is that there's no statistics.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, but from an emotional aspect, it seems like a better lottery than grinding away in a different way. And I would say it, to a certain extent, it's true, right? For instance, for me, funny enough, most people don't know this, and most Dota fans won't believe me because of my continued less knowledge in Dota than League of Legends. But when I started doing League of Legends work, it was literally because I had left school to take a break, and I had played, I had dropped League of Legends. I had been playing League of Legends, and then I just dropped it, and I literally, my day for the first month of being out, leaving school, was play Dota during the day, watch NBA at night. That was it. And I just grinded that for a month plus, and then I looked at the ecosystem, and I was like, this ecosystem is currently for Dota 1 players and fans and casters. There isn't a place for me to enter this and catch up in time. But then I look at League of Legends, and I'm like, that game is a freaking free-for-all. And I played that game, and I liked that game. So as much as I personally am currently finding better, I was in that same boat, right? As much as I'm currently finding more interest in Dota back in 2012, I am now going to shift my focus into League, because it just seems like a better opportunity. But I think for people like you and me, who perhaps have gone through different iterations, and we've had to adjust how we view esports and maybe different video games, I don't think we need to, I've had that thought too, right? Especially as the kind of memes around aspiring Valorant caster, and all of this started coming out. I look at it and I'm like, do I need to be doing that? Because I'm I don't know my future. I'm still freelancing, and I don't know what I want to do for long term yet. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, no, because here's the way I see it, right? If I want to be the aspiring Valorant or whatever game caster, or whatever my previous expertise was, right? So for you, if it's a social media manager, or whether it's some type of going back to journalism, for me, if it's casting, quite frankly, you know what? I think instead of putting all my eggs in that basket now, if I really wanted to, I think I could still have a shot once it took off.
Oh,
right?
no, totally.
I'm not saying it's a guarantee, right? I'm not saying I could just talk to someone and handshake my way in, but given my background and my knowing how much work I put in, and knowing what I did then to get my place at the table. I think it could still be worth a shot later. And so I think we live in a different situation of maybe we don't need to have that panic of being the first, but at the same time, like you said, but now we're just more aware, right? So we also can't like ignore it.
No, totally.
Because we're like, well, it could turn into something. Like
we've
lived
that.
We've lived that. So it's like, shoot, right? We lived that. Like, I to this day, I never thought League of Legends was going to go for over 10 years, right? I just didn't think that. I thought 5 years for sure. I thought maybe 8. Maybe like 10 would be like the end right back then. And then I look at it now, I just, I'm like, now I can't even fathom how long this might go, right? I don't even want to take a guess. So we've lived that. And then we've seen, I don't know if you've ever been personally invested into, maybe some games that didn't take off, but for me, Heroes of the Storm was that, right? I was really invested in it when I got invited to test it out. I played the beta like a crazy ton. I was researching it, I was giving feedback, and then I was owning the projects of Heroes of the Storm at ESLNA, and I wanted it to do so much better. I wanted the game to change, the ecosystem to change, and it just didn't happen. So now we've seen both sides of the coin. So I think the anxiety that we might get, and I think I perhaps get a little bit less, but again, I think that's maybe
the nature of the job.
I'm less invested into like single games, even in beforehand. But I think we live in a different anxiety of we're just too
we know how shit works. Like, we know how things work, and we know how behind the scenes.
Whereas other people are like, this might fail, but it's still a better shot for me to get inside.
I think
than other things, right? And I totally.
I think part of it is just like
well.
It's also a heartbreak, if that makes sense, where you see people who have put. I guess I just think about games like Dawngate, or I think about things like Trackmania. Do you remember Trackmania and Shootmania and like Smite?
Trackmania, yeah,
and like Smite and like some of the high-res games, and I think about some other titles that you may have seen at. I'm thinking about like IPLs, where they would have like a bunch of games or dream hacks and stuff like that, where they didn't necessarily have their own takeoff, and you're thinking about the people who have put so much time and effort into trying to make that a thing, and it's like they're either the developer just kind of looked at it and said, okay, this isn't worth the marketing expense anymore, or there wasn't like the community to really sustain it. And It's the same thing with fighting games. It's like fighting games, there are people who really, really, really love a fighting game that no one plays anymore. And even if you have like, it's the meme about Melty Blood. Melty Blood is like the meme is that the tournaments for Melty Blood always happen in the venue bathrooms, or like in a hotel room where like it's just the finals for Melty Blood are a laptop perched on a bathtub, and there are people who are just plugged in USB because they love it so much. But then you have games that have like the franchise appeal, like Street Fighter, where at least once or twice a year you'll have a third strike tournament, or you'll have a super turbo tournament, where because there is the franchise familiarity and value, you'll still have that kind of potential that it'll get dragged along by something else, or there'll be enough enthusiasts that they can make something happen special. But it's like, for us, like, I think it's an ongoing conversation internally for me, where I'm trying to separate my career aspects of it from my enjoyment of it. And I think that's what, like, we were talking about the danger of the subject of League of Legends versus Dota. But I think a lot of people, when I look at Reddit and I see people who are like, Valve, why don't you spend money on advertising? Why don't you like redo the new player experience? Like, don't you want Dota to be this big, like bigger than it is right now? And because I'm in the industry, or because I've at least paid attention or thought about this kind of stuff, it's like, no, like Dota is not going to be Fortnite. There is not going to be a Dota person flossing at a New Year's, like, no, like, but it's true though. Like, come on, the game, it comes out in 2009.
Totally
Dota
agree.
is 11 years old at this point. It is not going to be the thing that my parents are asking about. What's this Fortnite thing? That's the thing, though, is that as a fan base, you have to be fine with that. And there are people that are fine with that. But there's also the anxiety that comes with it, that what if Dota is your game and you're trying to make it a long-term career? It's like there's still that like, oh God,
Sure.
I need to either diversify for something I don't necessarily like, or I can keep pushing Dota until I die, and then hope that, like you were saying, because you and I have kind of cleared the hurdles it's like we have our own inertia in terms of our careers, where I looked at my resume and I was like, oh, I've got a pretty good esports resume at this point. And between the score and between EG, I'm pretty set where I can go to any company and be like, here's the value that I've brought to other companies. I was joking about being old, but being old is actually kind of a benefit these days, where it's like, oh, this person isn't like knows how to deal with business and isn't gonna like be an idiot. It's like that kind of thought is there as well, that experience. But I'm more just thinking maybe I'm still a little bit in the mindset of trying to be hungry and trying to like secure my spot, where I'm thinking like,
Okay.
like when you brought up that
Yeah.
we don't necessarily need to think about those games as like, oh, I'll drop everything and be a Valorant like content creator. I didn't think of the inertia, like I was saying. I didn't think of like our experiences having a degree of security because of what we've done, and being able to point to something and say, I did this project, I don't need to prove myself anymore. And for people who are like volunteering or still trying to find that, maybe that's a bigger anxiety for them, and why it's easier to just I think about the people, like one of the kind of archetypes of streamers or competitors are card game players. I think people who played, like, if you think about games like Magic the Gathering Online and Hearthstone and Gwent and now Runeterra, and to a certain degree the auto chess games, they're all kind of the same pool of pros, where they all like it's Savich and Swim and all these people that kind of go from game to game. And because those games don't really move the fastest in terms of new content, if a game like Gwent comes out, they just go to the Hearthstone pros and they say, who wants to play our game? We'll give you some money. Here's some tournaments that you can win money at. And then a new card game comes out, and then they do that, or they go back to Hearthstone or whatever for new content comes out. Those people are a little bit more dependent on, because there's only so much that they can really do, if that makes sense. But those kind of people look at new games like Legends of Runeterra come out, and I know that those people are looking in saying, I need to plan launch month about trying to be the Runeterra streamer. And I think it's not just the game, but it's also who's putting it out. And I think that a little bit of anxiety on my part is looking at what Riot is doing with trying to put their hands in all these different genres. And I'm not blaming them for doing that. If you've got the money and you've got the ability to experiment and essentially potentially fail, like, I don't think all of these games are going to be alive in 5 years. Say the 4 games you've got.
Sure.
Well, you've got League, you've got Teamfight Tactics, you've got like Runeterra, fighting game, and and Valorant. And so that's 5 games. And what they're doing is they're gambling and saying, we don't know if this fighting game is going to be what gets non-fighting game fans into fighting games. I think that's going to be hilarious to watch, actually. I think that when that fighting game launches, there's going to be so much salt on the internet, because there's going to be people who don't know how to play fighting games and don't know that they're going to be into it because of League. And they're going to be super into it because of League, but they're not going to be into it in the sense of, oh, I need to go to training mode and I need to learn animation frames for all the characters in order to know what's at advantage.
Yeah, they're going
they're not going to be told that they're bad. They're going to lose. They're going to try to button mash and they're going to lose. And
that's what I mean.
Exactly.
Results,
and they won't have the team environment. And they also, like, you see it with Street Fighters. When new Street Fighters come out, you have all these people that come in and they say, oh, I want to play Street Fighter. They'll play the 1-player mode, but then they'll go online, get bopped all the time, be told, hey, you got to get bopped all the time in order to learn and have fun. And then they say, well, I can't play with my friends. I can't get, like, oh, this is unfair that this guy is doing fireballs and I don't want to learn how to, like, I don't want to have to modify the way that I want to play in order to not lose, you know? Like I want to play Sona all the time, and I want to be able to contribute to my team by playing Sona. And for people who don't play League of Legends, Sona has one skill shot and a lot of auras. So essentially you can be useful to your team just by kind of mashing buttons. I'm not saying you can't play Sona like skillfully, but at an entry level, if I had to go to someone who's never played League before and say, okay, that person wants to contribute and that person wants to have fun, that's why Riot's successful. Riot is successful by taking people who aren't good and saying, you can contribute to playing with your friends, and your friends are the people who are going to keep you logging into this game because you want to play with them. You want to be social with them. So we are going to make it. Sorry.
This is a very.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to chime in real quick on that note of Sona. This is a very real thing because for those people who do play League and you've played for a while, just how real this is. Back at OGN, we used to have internal tournaments like every season, and it, we would draft teams, and there would always every team would have
doesn't play,
doesn't play, and every time, all of them would be taught a Mumu or Malphite. And all of them would be told, as long as you press R when I tell you to, you will do a good job, right? And then they had fun. Like that's like literally how then you get them to play the game. So I just thought it was funny that you mentioned
like
that
I said,
Sona.
You're trying to make people feel included, and you have to give people ways to contribute without necessarily like saying that if you go to a person and you tell them, the only way that you're going to have fun and the only way you're going to contribute to your team and the only way you're going to win is if you come in on your off hours and practice. With so many different games and so many different things pulling people's attention these days, doing that without the hook of friendship and saying you have to play with your group of friends or you want to play with your group of friends, doing that alone is hard. So that's what I think is going to, like with the fighting game aspect, you don't have a team. So like that's how you're gonna. It's either gonna be super successful in the way that Riot is gonna make it appealing for people, or it's not gonna be successful at all because of those hurdles. But going back to my original point, I tend to take these like really long tangents, but Riot can afford to have projects not work out at the moment, and if they are successful, it means that Riot not only owns the MOBA market, it dominates the FPS market, it dominates the card game market, it dominates the fighting game market, and you're like, but what if I'm not in that ecosystem? What if, like, hypothetically, I don't have anything against Riot as a company, but like, what if I just don't like Riot? What if I'm still salty as a Dota player and I just think that they're the devil? Like, what if I don't specifically want to work with them or work for that product? What are my options at that point? Does it eventually get to a point where I'm not able to make a full-time wage in esports because I'm not involved in a Riot product, And I think when I'm talking about FOMO, when it comes to like the career aspect of thing, I think that's mainly the thing that I want, maybe the thing that I couldn't put into words that I just did, where it's like,
yeah, it's funny because when you first kind of talked about that in passing, I did not even think about like this aspect. I had no idea like this could.
Yeah, I should have done a better job of that.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I thought it was either different directions or well, no. It's not that. I think it's I think you're putting it in a very nice way. Is what I'm saying is that there's a whole different aspect of FOMO, I guess, right, from a business sense rather than just a community sense. Obviously, there's a big one for a community sense too these days with how many games there are, but there is that for the business sense. Do you? So now that we've kind of I guess aired that out a little bit, I am wondering though, do you think maybe though that esports itself is also growing at a speed enough that by the time that situation potentially happens, it's still you could still be sustainable in something that's not a monopoly, right? Maybe not to the extent that you would want, but it's doable if you kind of just treat it as something
I always think of is I associate very closely Rainbow Six and Rocket League because I got into them at the same time, but also looking at them, I say Rainbow is unique enough that it has the aspects of the hero shooter Like it has the IP where people have
Yeah.
characters that they can attach themselves to, and characters that they feel comfortable maining. But it also has like the hardcore shooter mechanics. So it's a good mix of both Overwatch and CSGO. I always say if CSGO is at one end of the spectrum, which is pure mechanics, and Overwatch is at the other end of the spectrum, where it's more IP and more be attached to Symmetra because you really identify with Symmetra. Rainbow Six is in the middle, where it's got a little bit of both. And esports as an industry is big enough now that Rainbow can keep doing its thing, and Rainbow doesn't have to be cannibalized by the Runeterra stuff, because there are going to be people that still want military theming, and they're going to not want the cartoony stuff. Rocket League, no one's doing a Rocket League clone anytime soon. Rocket League is so lucky.
Well,
but at the
like
same time, it's like Rocket League is Epic now. Right? Like Rocket League got bought by Epic, and it's like Rocket League. I always said to our Rocket League pros that they have a super big benefit in the sense that it's very easy to explain to people, like verbally, what Rocket League is, and it's not so fantasy, like aesthetic, that it's embarrassing. Yeah, I know that sounds this silly, but it's like to a certain degree. If you're 30. And you're going to a house party and someone's asking you about League of Legends and you're showing them what it is on their phone, some people are going to be like, oh, like, that's, kiddie shit, or that's like too anime for me, if that makes sense. Like some people, like, I'm not saying whether it's correct or not. I'm more just saying that if you're like, say if you're working at a mundane office and you wanted to show them what esports was, Rocket League is non-offensive. Rocket League does not take a big buy-in. Rocket League does not have gore, bullets, guns. You got the kind of funny like hats and toppers and effects and stuff, but it isn't so anime, or it isn't so cartoony, or it isn't so like grimdark. Yeah, it's not too like niche. It's very palatable to a mainstream audience in terms of the aesthetic of the game. And because of that, I always look at it and say, like, a FIFA player who loves sports games and hates that kiddie shit that Nintendo puts out or whatever, they don't care about Rocket League, Like, they aren't going to be offended by Rocket League, so to speak. Their tastes aren't going to be. So I always think that that's an advantage to that. So I don't know. Like you were saying, esports may be big enough at this point that you can survive in a monopoly like that, but at the same time, both Rocket League and both Rainbow Six are esports run by their developers. And I know that, like, I don't know how much of it is public or whatever, but like Rainbow Six was never supposed to last this long. Rainbow Six was supposed to be a game like Wildlands, like Tom Clancy Wildlands, where it was game, two expansions, and then you're done. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Rainbow Six is not supposed to be still running at this point. So that's because the devs are really passionate, and that's because the community is really passionate. And it's like, what happens if the devs weren't as passionate? Like we could not have Rainbow in our lives right now. So it's different, and it's also coming back to a generational thing where Dota was an esport, CSGO was an esport before the devs got their kind of like, put their thing into it. League is kind of the same thing. You had the IPLs, and you had the MLGs and that kind of stuff, and that kind of kick-started things until the LCS starts. And it's like, you don't really have that anymore, where the community starts the esport and then the dev comes on. You've got, if we've got a game that can be played competitively, it's how do we as a developer control the esport from the start? So it's almost like we have to, like, if we had this conversation in 5 years, we would be able to kind of have an answer to that, because just now we're now starting to see the results of that, or from start to finish, So I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I didn't really think of it from the perspective that you brought up, that both of us have kind of like entrenched our positions. And I think it's maybe different for talent, because I think that enough smaller games need bigger talent, like bigger name talent, like you and Rachel, and like, those level of hosts and stuff like that, where you can still kind of make, you can do your cram for their finals or whatever, do the event, and then kind of go. from there, go on to the next one or come back or whatever. I don't know. It's a complicated question, and it kind of depends on like what angle you're working at. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of case by case, for different, especially like you said, for different positions, right? Obviously, even just within our two expertise, our areas of expertise, there's a lot of differences that come with it. But I just think, now that we've talked about it and we've kind of looked back as well.
Jump off. Yeah.
I thought it was a good time to, well, consider it and say, okay, well, maybe things have changed. And like you said, I don't think anyone can answer that confidently. I think we can have.
I think I just know that I'm tired. I'm just tired, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that's just like, I don't know if that's me. I don't know if that's like a lot of us who have been here for a while. And I think it's more of we're tired, and then we look at Valorant and we look at the Runeterra stuff coming out, and we're like, oh God, we've got like. Not burning any bridges.
I have that begs a question. No. Like
no, exactly.
It doesn't mean that you don't like it or whatever. It's totally separate. But I that does beg a question, and I think maybe this will be a good topic to kind of wrap things up on. But when you say tired, are you tired? Like, do you think you're tired of just like having to learn new, like invest into new games? Like, is it the investment switching, or is it just like too many games, or is it
no
like,
I think it's less
or
of
maybe you don't
too
know,
many games, because it's not like I look at games that every game that comes out, like you said, you look at a game and you say I'm cool, like I don't need to be in it because I'm not super interested. I think it's more that like now that I'm doing a more general gaming role where like with EG, I only had to be interested in the games that we were picking up. If we dropped a team or dropped a division, I stopped caring about the game. Because like I didn't need, like when we dropped PUBG or we dropped whatever, I didn't have to care about PUBG anymore. And because I was being paid full time, it was easier to say, I'm being paid full time to care about this game. I'll find a way to be interested in it. But now that I'm in a more general role where I'm going to have to work with Valorant streamers eventually, if Chillhop wants to get into that, I'm going to have to be available. Like it's more of a I'm tired in the sense of, I don't know if it's just like it's an anxiety thing almost. It's a thought of I can't afford not to be, if that makes sense. Like I can't take the chance.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're tired of being like.
I can't take the chance of
in a certain way
not doing it, if that makes like not paying attention. I can't ignore that entire ecosystem. Right. I don't necessarily care about it from a personal perspective because like I don't want to learn another card game. I've come to peace that I'm really bad at card games because I don't like tinkering. I like Slay the Spire because I play the run of Slay the Spire, build my deck, and then when I lose, I lose. That's great. My deck's gone. I don't play Magic because I don't like the idea of I bought my deck and then I got to tinker with it and buy more cards and just play endless games to know how bad it is or good it is. Tinker more, take out a card here, put in a card there. I don't have the energy for that anymore, especially, when I'm doing it for my full-time job. So it's taking that scenario and applying it to 4 or 5 games where it's like, I don't really want to learn the Riot Fighter, but I might have to because it's work, and I might not have the luxury. Like if the Riot Fighter comes out and it completely bodies Capcom in terms of fighting games, all the pros are going over to it because Riot will have better money than Capcom does. And if it becomes a big enough game for streaming wise, fighting games don't really do that well in terms of streaming like day to day. But if it brings the League audience and all of a sudden there's like thousands of people who don't normally watch fighting games wanting to watch the Riot Fighter, all of a sudden that creates a new economy for all these fighting game pros like Daigo and Tokido and Chris G and all these people who play fighting games professionally. They might just start streaming now. And it's like, okay, then it becomes a thing where, okay, maybe Chillhop, it has a place there because they need music for streaming, right? So you can't just have those blind spots in certain positions, I guess. And maybe that's something I didn't necessarily realize or think about, where maybe it's just the anxiety related to my job because my job demands needing to pay attention to a lot of games rather than saying, okay, I can just leave this one. I don't really need it. So I don't know. When I brought up the FOMO, it was more of just like this weird background radiation It's a thing that it's this creeping. I don't want to call it creeping dread
Sure.
because that paints the game as bad. I'm not saying that the game is like the problem. It's more of my interface with the game. It's more of saying that like, oh God, there's like I'm seeing more news about it. I'm seeing my friends talk about it. My friends are mentioning, playing Runeterra or whatever, and I'm thinking, I'm not taking part in that. What's wrong with me? And maybe that's because it's both a personal thing. I don't want to play it because of entertainment value, or do I not want to play it because of work? And that's always like a funny thing. And maybe that's a better topic for another day of separating work and fun. But that's how it's all interfacing, is thinking, is there something wrong with me, or is my taste shit, or am I missing out on something? Because, but those are the kind of things that go through your head, right? Those are the kind of things that, that.
No. Yeah, the thought definitely creeps up on you. I mean, as I've had similar thoughts when I started producing at ESL, because so for anyone who knows,
everything
ESL does a lot of games. They've dropped a lot, but now they've picked up a lot of new ones. So like they do a lot of games, and so sometimes I've had to like go into meetings for games that I just like don't play, or maybe didn't even know that we had a league because it was just running in a different division or something like that. And for a while I had to sit there and be like, okay, so how much do I actually invest my time and effort into these other areas, right? And how much do I actually follow headlines, and then like the next tier was maybe it's like highlights, and then next tier is like the Reddits and whatnot. And for a while, when I was jumping around different games and just helping like start up different projects or be part of different starting projects in North America, like my daily routine would be get to the office and then open like 7 different Reddits, right, of just different gaming communities. All right, read up on the latest memes and the latest complaints and whatnot, and then be like, okay, I feel a little more confident about today's meeting. Like that would be my routine. But it's I think, like you said, once your job, if you start with maybe a little bit more focus, and it, actually now that you've talked about it, it sounds like for you more so than me, it started with like one game, then like a handful of specific games, and then now you're obviously you're kind of just opening up the ocean of games. I think for people who go that route or similar routes that we have in slowly expanding that game library that we have to interface with as work rather than just hobby, I think what you're saying creeps up at least at a similar thing creeps up at some point for sure. Like you can't avoid that, right? Because your job in some ways demands that, and I think that's partly where the anxiety comes in, because you're doing it, like you said, you start wondering if you're doing it because it's your job or you're doing it for other reasons, and that alone is stress that you just don't want to have to deal with when it's something that you used to do for fun or you'd still do for fun for other games and things like that. So I think there's definitely that. Personally, I look at it and not that I don't think I'm as tired, but I also look at it and think, I wonder when the community will say it's tired, right? Like I wonder when the gaming fan, because right now I think we're in this sweet spot of we're gaining more gamers, right? Like the gamer community overall, just whether it's casual, hardcore, whatever, we're gaining more gamers as we're expanding games and as we're expanding the different communities, right? Hardcore, esports, whatever. Like all of these are growing at the same time, so we're not seeing it. But at the end of the day, there's a limited number of human beings on Earth and a limited number of hours for everyone. So like at some point, we're gonna hit this threshold of like, okay, like I'm done with having to talk to my friend or listen to my friend talk about a 6th game, right? Like someday that's gonna happen, and I'm wondering like what that looks like, because I don't think it's happening yet. I don't think it's happening tomorrow. But I do wonder at a casual level if that happens, or maybe it just happens so at such a small scale and people just kind of brush it off and move on, that maybe we'll.
It's another topic. It's podcast number 2. I think we could be here for another hour and a half in terms of talking about this, but.
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. I mean, we definitely need to wrap things up a little bit from time perspective, but I think there's very different aspects that we can take a look at in terms of the FOMO, or in terms of maybe being like dragged along by all these different games in a different sense. So it's interesting to hear kind of where you're coming from, just because obviously even with the similarities we've had, we have such differences in the paths we've taken within esports.
I think It's fun to kind of go
it was
go
fun
down
to
memory lane a
kinda
little
hear
bit.
your
Like
take on it, for
I
sure.
literally when you mentioned that MLG Summer Arena
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever, I literally looked it up, and I was like, wow, $10,000, 100% of the prize pool goes to the winner. Team Solo Mid, Team Curse, Team Black not winning anything. Team Black with Sven Skaren on it. In 2012.
Yeah,
Reckless Fat Mama. Oh my god. I'm looking at the like I said, I'm looking at the page right now, and then I look at the Reddit thread for it. And I'm gonna send you it on Discord. Oh man, there are some names.
Oh my god.
There are some names in that Reddit thread.
Please do.
7 years ago. It says last edited 7 years ago. August 4th, 2012. And it has predictions from Demon, Quickshot, Joe Miller, Jason Kaplan, Studio, like all these people that like are still involved in esports. And then first post, highest upvoted post is Alex Penn. Alex Penn, who just left PUBG, is working for, I forget now. He just joined another esports company. But it's almost like I want to do a reunion, you know? It's almost like I want to have this generational reunion.
I mean,
where it's all these people that, you know, if you were esports workers, volunteers, class of 2012, he's working at COD League now. He's working at for Call of Duty with Activision. But
oh, okay, yeah.
you know, we can sit here and be nostalgic all the time, but it's like I said, it's just interesting to see where we've come and where we're kind of going to go. So maybe that's a good place to yeah.
Yeah, everyone has their own class. Yeah, I think that's like you said. We've gone kind of down memory lane, and then we covered a little bit of where we are
go
now.
for it. I don't care.
Before we wrap up, just one final note that I just want everyone to. I don't want this to
Here we
ever be
go.
forgotten.
We've
That
got a
event,
story.
the MLG Summer Arena.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Is the event? Do you know what I'm about to say? Is the event where where Monte
Is this the
Cristo?
pillow? Oh,
The
yeah, the
Monte Cristo
pillow.
we all know. Had to interview Dyrus's pillow.
Oh my god.
So I just want everyone to make sure that like
that can't be forgotten.
We cannot let that disappear.
Monty
relic
died
with us
inside
forever.
a little bit.
So
I remember like
I just wanted to,
there's a couple like maybe that's what we can make a regular segment is that we just like we bring up some dumb 2012ism. Like
Yeah,
I
I'm
remember
sure there's
one
plenty
where they tried to do
we
like
could
pro
talk
wrestling
about.
announcements for like of the players coming in. It was an IPL, I think, but I just remember it being so. I think it was an IPL. I think it was the San Francisco Showdown or something like that. I remember they did it with Cutie Pie and Odd One. Those are the ones that stick out in my head, and they never did it again because they realized how awkward it was. But this was the pillow. Oh god. So I was in. Okay, so I was thinking. I was like, oh, was I involved at this point? Because I don't. Nothing sticks out about this tournament in my mind. And then you mentioned that, and I was like, oh yeah, I was around for that. That was that. So good
that
times.
sticks out.
We'll leave it on that. I don't know. I'll just kind of. Do you want me to kind of outro it? I don't know. Sure. So yeah, this is the first episode of.
Please do the honors.
I forgot the name of our podcast already. Jesus Christ. I just blanked on it entirely. Good morning, good night. Episode 1 in the bag. Will, where can they like find you on the internet?
Yeah, so you can find me pretty much all my platforms are Will Chobra. So the platforms I use the most are Twitter and Twitch. I try to stream regularly just to, keep my toes wet a little bit and also connect with people, where I just play a variety of games, mostly not necessarily esports focused, but we talk about a number of different stuff. And then obviously Twitter is kind of where you can find my latest updates. So those two are the shortcuts.
Something that I will always remember, like on top of the no, it was you asking me about your handle.
Man.
You're gonna say that's the thing that always sticks out in my head where I'm like,
that,
oh yeah, I was a big help to Chobra. I actually did something where we were like you were Chobra lol, and then you were trying to figure out whether to change it for OGN or I think MLG or something like that. And I was just like, let's just do Will Chobra. Like, I think that works because we were trying to figure out first name, last name or something like that. And obviously like it worked out, but,
yep, and it's
yeah,
stuck.
for me, I'm first name, last name on everything. And that's a weird thing. And maybe that's a topic of handles where it's like, like for another time. But like I've never had an esports handle, or like I've never had a username. It's always just been Matt Demers because of the journalism angle for things. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, all Matt Demers, Demers. Yeah, I don't know. I don't do much streaming or anything like that yet. I'm kind of dipping my toes back into it and trying to kind of figure out where my spot is. But yeah, if you are looking for archives for the show, I registered a domain for us, just gnmcast.com. Or does that work? Should be. Good. Or no, it's gmncast.com, not gnm, gmncast.com.
Yes.
Goodmorninggoodnight.com,
yeah.
That's taken, but we're on like Spotify and Google Play and all those things. So if you just search Good Morning Good Night on those platforms, you should find us. I set up an email, so if any of you guys have any questions or anything like that, or any topics that you guys want us to talk about, it's gmncastmail@gmail.com. And you can find a link to that on gmncast.com, because there's like an email this podcast thing. So if you guys have any questions or topics you want us to cover, it's probably the easiest way to reach out to us. So I think I hope you have a good day, my friend. Or no, you're good night. That was the thing. I wanted to be like, oh, we could do a witty outro. We could do a witty outro. I could say have a good night, Will, and you could say have a good morning.
Yeah. Good morning. Yep. There we can reverse it. There you go. All right. This will be the first time we do
Christ,
it. The premiere of our witty outro.
Are you gonna go first?
And then we're just gonna cut it right there.
Okay. Well, Will, I hope you have a good night, my friend.
No, you go first, so it's reversed for the outro. Okay.
Jesus Christ.
Well,
all right. Till the next
episode.
Morning. See you guys. And stop recording. Okay, I'm good. I know you're still live, but I think that went well. I had fun with it.